list of those skills that great managers have. So it's a kind of a core skill there. And we're going to be going through this in a little more detail. And I would call it, we're gonna geek out on it a little bit. So I just want to have up front to let you know that as we go through and really tease this out in finite detail, there are really some overarching principles here that are most important. We're going to tease all those things out, and then we'll bring it back together at more of a simplistic look at delegation. So we're going to start out with the agenda here. Let me show you what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about what delegation is, some of the benefits, and the barriers and obstacles to delegation. I'm going to share with you a model that lists 7 levels of delegation. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll talk about adapting your leadership style to various situations that you find yourself in as a supervisor. And finally, we'll look at the elements of an effective delegation, bring it all back together to look at delegation, the delegation cycle, and you'll be on your way. So let's get started with that. This is my Captain Obvious slide here. Most basically, the delegation is the transfer of tasks or responsibilities from one person to another. And when we talk about it in a leadership context, it often involves empowering individuals to exercise a certain level of autonomy by assuring that the necessary skills and resources are available for that person, the delegate, to be successful. And oftentimes when we're talking about delegation, we're talking about it from a downward flow perspective. And that's what we're sort of talking about today. Some of you might be aware of another concept called work contracting. And that is a subset of delegation. If you're a certified public manager, or perhaps in another leadership courses you've come across the idea of work contracting, which is delegation, but it's more of a negotiated agreement between the employee and the supervisor, and there's a little more of a lateral flow and mutual support and benefit as we go about that. I'm not going to really dice those out today. We're going to talk about delegation as a general concept, but if you're accustomed to work contracting and that's a principle that you really like to abide by, then know that it fits within the term delegation as we're talking about it today. Okay. Sometimes the best way to define something is also to take a look at what it is not. And we're going to take a look at that right here. There are 5 things that I've pinpointed that delegation is not. First of all, it is not dumping or abdicating responsibility. In order for delegation to really work, then the one who's delegating, the supervisor, has to remain involved. And at the start, this engagement might be really involved, and then it might back off later. And we're going to talk more about that later on as we get into the 7 levels and situations and how you adjust to those situations in a delegation agreement. Delegation is also not a one-time event. Some of us, at least I myself, have heard delegation used as a strength and also as a pejorative. Oh, we'll just delegate that, right? Some of you may have heard that term used pejoratively. Just delegate it, get rid of it. And that's that first one, dumping or abdicating, but also this idea that it's a one-time event. We hand it off and it's done. It's not a one-time event, nor is it a 2-time event, meaning that you hand it off and then check back later to see at the very end to see what happened. but rather it's an involved process that we go through um, to make that delegated assignment successful. Delegation is also not the same every time and in every situation. So uh, a delegated assignment might begin one way, and as time goes on, it may shift and change in terms of your leadership style and in terms of your involvement as a supervisor. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. I also want to mention that delegation is not punting away your dispassion. Sometimes as supervisors, and especially in the state, we have a lot of what has been termed working supervisors. That means you have a workload that is either the same or similar to those who you might be supervising. And so having the authority to delegate some assignments can bring up the temptation to get rid of the things that you don't like and to put them on someone else. And that's not true delegation either. We need to recognize as leaders that oftentimes we need to delegate things that we are passionate about and that we would rather kind of keep ourselves perhaps. But for various reasons, it may be advantageous for us to delegate that assignment. Delegation also is not an indictment of the leader's competence. In fact, oftentimes your competence will be seen in your ability to delegate well and to be able to allow employees to accomplish the tasks that you have assigned and to give the requisite amount of direction versus support. And those two actually aren't mutually exclusive, so I shouldn't have said versus. The delegation plus support. Okay. Oh, just got a message that the live stream option does not appear to be working. Shane, can you take a look at that for us? Next thing I want to take a look at and share are the benefits of delegation. Delegation is really, let me stop here. Let me make sure I've got the, there we go. Okay. Let me know if the live streaming has begun.
Yeah, you probably did what I did.
I stopped it instead of starting it. Okay. All right. So let's back up here a little bit with the benefits of delegation. Delegation really benefits a full circle of folks. It benefits the supervisor, it benefits the employee or the delegate, and it also benefits the organization as a whole. So there are a lot of benefits to it. As a supervisor, actually, you gain the trust of employees by delegating. And that increases the trust that your employees have in you because you are sharing an opportunity for them to grow, have some autonomy, and accomplish tasks and make decisions right at the decision point rather than being dictated to on every little item that comes up. As an employee, a delegated assignment offers an opportunity for knowledge and skill growth. It also is a sense of provides a sense of achievement. And one of the things we know from research is that one of the top 5 things that employees want is a certain level of autonomy in the job that they do. They want to be able to make decisions based on the information they have on the front line. And delegation allows for a level of autonomy. As an organization, of course, this benefits the entire organization by increasing the capacity within work teams, within work units or divisions, and increases the level of competence. It's really building your bench depth. And then there's also increased productivity and efficiency that comes from delegation. If all of the responsibility is kept with a supervisor, with you as a supervisor, you're going to find yourself out of rope pretty quick, and you're not going to be able to accomplish everything. It also provides opportunities for increasing teamwork and collaboration. Oftentimes, if an assignment is delegated, then that person, the delegate, is able to reach out and provide some leadership to colleagues and fellow team members. And so it increases the climate for collaboration. So those are important things. Let's get to some of the barriers and obstacles. And I'm using barriers and obstacles in a specific way. When I talk about barriers, I'm talking about um, things or ideas that prevent us from being successful out of the gate with a delegated assignment. When I talk about obstacles, I'm going to be talking about items that come up after an assignment is delegated, and those things often emerge. Sometimes there's crossover, and these are the same things, so we don't need to get wrapped around the axle about whether it's a barrier or obstacle, but let's talk about some of those things that stand in our way. I would say the number one uh, barrier is excuses, and we really have to do a self-check on ourselves with this. We need to take a look and say, are these things that I exhibit on a regular basis, or are these things that I'm exhibiting on a particular assignment that should be delegated? And when we make excuses, oftentimes we tell ourselves that there's there's a stretch, there's an opportunity, but it's uncomfortable to let go of some of those assignments. There's a sense of control. And sometimes we tell ourselves other things like, oh, it's going to take too much time. I don't have anyone who can do it, or at least not do it as well as if I just did it myself. And or we say nobody else on my team has the time either, or nobody else I supervise has the time either. So these are things we tell ourselves to rationalize our resistance to delegating assignments. We need to put ourselves in check and question whether or not those tendencies are emerging in us. Knowing when to delegate is also a barrier. Sometimes there are urgent activities or decisions that have to be made right away. And uh, uh, though a delegation can be done fairly quickly, there may be a learning curve that a delegated assignment would require that doesn't fit within the time frame that you have. So that does take some looking at. But we often use those timelines as a barrier to delegating the assignment. And knowing who you should delegate to can also be a barrier. And as you're considering an assignment to delegate, it's important to take a look at the candidates, uh, the person who's going to be delegated to, that candidate's workload, their development goals, network relationships, their interests, and those kinds of things can really lend themselves well to a delegated assignment, and they may also decrease the learning curve that is involved. So these can be vital to the success, as they can. This one item, that who you delegate to, can be as vital to success as the current skill or knowledge that exists uh, in the employee or in your work group. So there are also some other considerations to be made about the degree of impact that a delegated assignment might have. So how much exposure does the assignment present to the person that you're delegating it to? Is the employee able to handle that exposure? And while we need to make sure to be fair, we also don't want to be overprotective of folks. The manner in which an assignment can really serve as a barrier up front. If an assignment is done with a courteous manner and expressions of confidence in the elements of order are brought to the assignment, so it's not just a, hey, can you do something with this? That can get things off on the wrong start if you have that negative beginning to a delegated assignment. But taking some time just to take a look at it and figure out, okay, how will I be delegating this? And we'll get to some questions that you need to ask yourself to get an assignment ready for an effective delegation. We'll be looking at that. Let's take a look at some of these obstacles, and I'm going to spend a little more time on the micromanagement one as specifically. So what I've listed thus far are barriers that might prevent a delegation or a delegated assignment from being successful right out of the gate, but we're going to come across all kinds of barriers as the assignment proceeds. So these are some of the obstacles that tend to get in our way. So as a supervisor, we need to be aware of micromanagement. And I'll get into some of the red flags of micromanagement in just a moment. But there's also lack of support. Lack of support would entail not providing the required resources to be successful in the delegated assignment. And also there's that emotional support too, helping the employee or the delegate to feel their way through the assignment and where they are at in the progress of that assignment. A failure to plan, and that's probably an obvious one, and lack of communication. When we delegate, it's uber important to have follow-up. And that's throughout the process, not just at the terminus of a project or a delegated assignment. And finally, the fear of losing control. And that really sums up what micromanagement is all about. But let's talk about micromanagement specifically. If you recognize in yourself that you have micromanagement tendencies, or you're wondering what are those tendencies, here are a list of 6 red flags that employees have identified in supervisors that sort of flag that there's some micromanagement happening. So if you can learn to recognize when you engage in these behaviors, you can prevent them or you can remedy them as you go along. First, obviously, right out of the gate is resisting a delegation to begin with. But there are a number of things as you go along with an assignment that that tend to happen. And one of those things are removing tasks after they've been assigned. So you might say, okay, take this on. And then all of a sudden you're like, I'm worried about how that's going. So I'm going to pull back that part of the assignment or this part of the assignment, or I'm going to allow you to make this decision. But as we're going along, I'm going to take those decision points away. And there is an appropriate time for that given situations, but oftentimes if we really do some self-examination, it really is spawned from our fears. Not allowing employees to work independently. Like I said before, that's one of the autonomy is one of the top 5 desires for employees to have. So we need to make sure that delegated assignments come with a certain level of autonomy. And obviously, if we're going to exercise complete control as a supervisor, that's going to hinder the creativity and the opportunity for that delegate to succeed and flourish in the assignment. And finally, I think this is a very common, it's withholding information or resources. And as a supervisor, you may have access to things, information and resources, And oftentimes in organizations, that information or those resources become capital. And there is a tendency for a supervisor to get into a micromanagement behavior of rationing that information or those resources. So we need to prevent ourselves from doing that. Let's talk a little bit about levels of delegation. And this is our first model that we're going to talk about today. And uh, I want to make sure that you don't get too caught up in the numbers. There are a lot of numbers here, 1 through 7. And what is presented here is a spectrum. Number 1 at the beginning is hardly delegation at all. And number 7 would be a full delegation where the assignment is basically in the hands of the delegate and they control all aspects of it. Now, that's not to say that 7 is always desirable. There are situations where 1 would be appropriate. We're going to go through each of these and dice them out. And it's not important for you to memorize which one is which or to diagnose this every time you go to make an assignment. The important thing to remember here is what level, um, what is going on at each level. And in the end, we'll come back to 5 questions I have for you to ask yourself before delegating an assignment. And that's what's really important about this particular model. So let's start with tell. In this situation, there really isn't much delegated here other than a task or set of tasks for the delegate to carry out. This might be appropriate if you're in an emergency situation or where safety or speed are just absolutely critical. And so there are times when this is appropriate. But most of us wouldn't really consider this much of delegation. This is more of, I need you to do this task or this set of tasks. Go do it. Okay. In our second level here, this is where the supervisor explains the what and the why. And this is really the only thing that gets delegated here is the gathering of information or the gathering or organizing of tasks. The supervisor maintains all the decision-making authority at this level. So this might be appropriate if the delegate has access to important data or information sources, but they're not going to be involved in the implementation later down the road, or they're not going to be implementing or acting on any of the data. They're just providing the data. In that case, the only thing you're really delegating is for them to is to bring back the information that will be acted upon. So usually in this situation, the delegate is only involved with the assignment on a short-term basis or in a very limited role. In level 3 here, we have the consult, and in this case, what's really been delegated is the information gathering tasks, and the supervisor maintains the decision-making authority again. But in this case, the delegate has access to really important information. So the delegate might be an expert and they have some expertise to recommend potential options. So what happens is the delegate has an increased level of influence on the direction of the assignment. And because of time constraints, or maybe there are delicate politics or other factors, it might not be optimal to saddle the delegate with the final decisions in this case. All right. Now we get to level 4, and this is probably what you start to recognize as traditional delegation. Um, this in this situation, see, the supervisor extends the assignment and may give guidelines, expectations, but the delegate gets to dig into the assignment. They come up with the action plans, they make the decisions, and they execute on those. However, the supervisor controls the timing and participates in major decisions with the delegate. So that's why it says agree. They tend to agree on a path forward. So it becomes a little more collaborative and a little less directive. And we see this a lot in our government work because often there are intra-department issues, political situations, and executive decisions that might impact the assignment along the way. And so timing of these actions to move forward might be in the purview of the supervisor more than it is the delegate. Not all the time, but it may be in that situation. So if it's especially a volatile project or it has a wide span of impact, it might need approval at certain stages before it moves on. And typically, the delegate at this point remains involved in the decision-making points all along the way. And they participate and are involved in agreement about the next steps forward. Okay. At level 5, this level is a lot more autonomous. The delegate charges forward just like before in level 4. They are in charge of the assignment and they simply keep the supervisor up to speed on decisions and actions. So the supervisor is less involved in the decision making and more involved in just being in the know of what's going on and what's taking place at certain stages of the assignment. So the supervisor monitors the progress and alerts the delegate if there are some mitigating circumstances or new things emerge that need attention. That's what happens here. Level 6 is our next one here, and the supervisor here begins to be a little less involved in monitoring situations and the politics. Rather, the delegate monitors those and runs all aspects of the assignment and simply provides regular updates and reports to the supervisor. And the supervisor might periodically inquire a little deeper on detail as needed. The supervisor's main concern becomes resource allocation and other support measures, but they don't meddle with operational decisions and actions. And like I said, sometimes a delegated assignment does not start out this way, but over time gets to this level. Finally, we have the level 7 here. Level 7 is the delegate is entirely responsible. So the supervisor might provide some mentoring and feedback. So a good example of level 7 might be how Utah code delegates responsibilities to executives and commissioners of each agency. So these cabinet members report to the chief of staff, but the chief typically provides general direction or specific guidance on a governor's initiative, but they rarely get involved with specific agency processes or day-to-day decisions, the work and the responsibility of the agencies. They're not involved in that. It is completely delegated to those executives or commissioners. So this level of delegation requires significant expertise and experience on the part of the delegate. And there's a specific body of knowledge and skill that might be required of the delegate at this level. So looking at the whole thing again, we have these 7 levels, but if I were to say what's really important here, it is these 5 questions at the bottom. It's not necessary for you to figure out whether you're at a level 4 or level 6, but the answer to these questions will dictate to you how much your involvement is required as a supervisor and what kind of involvement it requires. So first, ask, how much direction do you need to provide? What support do you need to offer the delegate? How will you determine the methods and means or rather, back up, who will determine those methods and means? And who has authority to make decisions? Which decisions do they have authority to make? And then finally, how much monitoring and feedback is needed along the way? This might seem a little, this chart might seem a little anal here, but it's a rudimentary example of an office unit with 6 decision points listed in the first column. I'm sharing this with you just so you can see how in one office there might be multiple decisions that are delegated, but they are delegated at different levels. So it's not just that a set of employees always get delegated to in a particular fashion. And it's also not that because you do one particular style well as a supervisor or one level well, that you always delegate at that level. You need to look at the situation and when and how you're going to delegate for that particular thing. Let me move over here and click on this, and you see that this work team represented by those little icons of people there are in different situations, and different levels of delegation are going on. So when it comes to vacation days, which is the first level up there, in this situation, this is a level 4 agreement. The supervisor is likely to say something to the effect here of, let me know when you want to take vacation, give me a heads up so I can be sure it doesn't conflict with anyone or anything else, and then you can proceed. In this case, the schedule for holidays or the schedule for staffing is in the purview of the supervisor, and they maintain control of that, but they're getting input about from employees about things coming up, right? When it comes to tool selection, that's the third one down there, the supervisor has delegated at a level 6. In this case, the employees have been given a budget. They negotiate with each other. They make the decisions and follow procedures to purchase the necessary tools. And maybe the supervisor might get a monthly report on expenditures, let's say. So on the other end of the spectrum, you have the supervisor that determines office hours and what will be adhered to, and they're doing this at a level 2. You see that on the second row there. The employee might provide data on the busiest times in order to inform the supervisor when certain staffing levels are needed, but ultimately the supervisor makes the decision about whom and how many employees will staff the office during the day. This model, some of you might be familiar with this model. It is the situational leadership model, and this is a model that was developed by Paul Hersey and Ken Blanchard a number of years ago. It might even be as far back as the 80s. And this model really encourages leaders to adjust their style for various situations. I think this model goes really well with delegation because, as we talked about at the beginning, delegation doesn't remain the same. As a delegated project proceeds, it might be necessary for you as a supervisor to adjust your style. At the bottom of this model, we have here Let's see here. Get over here. The horizontal axis is directive behavior. And as you go right, it demands a more directive approach to the delegate. And the vertical one, you see, is more supportive behavior, and it demands more support as you go up. So let's take it through some of these boxes here. So the red box at the bottom, that's bottom right there, depicts a situation in which the supervisor is very directive and might engage in a more prescriptive, dictated approach. And this lines up well with the model we were just talking about, the 7 levels. This would be like a 1 or a 2 level. And this approach might happen at the beginning of a delegated assignment during a critical incident, when command and control is necessary, and that's where it is. Then the highly directive style is common uh, when uh, when an employee might not quite have the familiarity with the assignment or the specifications of that assignment yet. And so they need a little more direction in that. And that may or may not have to do with the employee's competences, just has to do with the employee being oriented to the assignment at hand. And now let's move to the orange box in the upper right. As the employee progresses in the assignment, they typically need increased support. And this might come in the way of additional training or coaching. And as we talked about before, the introduction to important stakeholders. They might need to be introduced to those folks, introduced to colleagues that they will need to work with in the assignment, and oriented to that all of the figures who are involved in the assignment. They might also need access to specific tools or software, and they could also benefit from frequent encouragement and review of their work to make sure they're in line with what you have in mind for the outcomes. Direction is still high at this level, that orange level there, but the increase in support assures that the employee has what they need to eventually act independently in the assignment. And a coaching approach works really well here. And I just want to take an aside on that note. If you participated with us previously, you may have attended 2 of our off-the-shelf offerings that dealt with coaching. If not, know that these are available at the DHRM Center for Excellence YouTube channel. And I will be providing these slides, so you will have the address to see that. But we keep all of our off-the-shelf offerings out there at our YouTube channel, so you're free to review those and see what's happening and how it might supplement or not you're able to attend a live session. But 2 I'd like to draw attention to were the first one: coaches wanted, no experience necessary, or no experience required. And that was offered by Mark Osenbach, and it was a fantastic treatise on basic coaching as a supervisor. And then one I did this past January called Motivational Techniques for Performance Coaching. And you're free to take a look at those and see how that might help you. Back to our model here. We're going to move to the yellow box in the upper left corner. This leadership style now is starting to decrease in the directive behaviors, but it maintains the high supportive behaviors. So in this situation, the employee has a high level of competence, and they have a high level of skill and knowledge in the area that they're operating in within the delegated assignment. But consistent monitoring or return and report behaviors might be still necessary for this assignment. There might be issues that need the leader's intervention along the way, like allocating resources or perhaps providing further training. However, the employee makes the most of the decisions, and the especially regarding the methods and the means of how the assignment is accomplished. As a as a supervisor, you're outlining the expectations for the outcomes, but the means are really controlled by the supervisor at in this quadrant. I mean, the means, sorry, back up, are by the employee, by the delegate. They're the ones who are controlling the methods and means, and they direct the project forward. So this is really similar to the level 5 that we talked about earlier. And then finally, down there at the bottom left-hand corner, we have the green box, and this calls for the leader to shift away from the supportive role, and and they're not uh, they're not in a real directive mode either. So there's less support, less direction in this, and the employee is mostly autonomous in operating in the delegated assignment. So the leader is sure not to meddle in the details. At this level, the employee is permitted a lot of autonomy, and they make the decisions and execute the tasks along the way. They control the means and the methods. And the employee likely has access to the necessary resources and the stakeholders to negotiate terms themselves, and they can deal with the conditions and changes to the assignment as they move along, oftentimes in a much better way than a supervisor would. At this level, when you have a delegate operating in the green, it's likely that if you as a supervisor step in, you have to be very cautious or you might end up slowing the process down or making it less efficient. You're just charging the employee, the delegate, to run on with this assignment and to make it happen. So my real purpose in showing this situational leadership model really is to impress that the points and the levels of delegation that we talked about, they can evolve over the course of an assignment, and especially if it's a long-term assignment. If it's going on for months, or maybe it's a delegated assignment that's years long, um, there will be an adjustment to the way the supervisor handles that delegated assignment. So really here, there are some elements that make for an effective delegation agreement. And when I'm talking about a delegation agreement, we're talking about upfront. I'm suggesting that if it's a complicated assignment, that really does become uh, an agreement written and outlined by you and the employee or the delegate that you're working with. Up front, as a supervisor, you need to know or have a good idea of what the desired results are. What are the guidelines and parameters? What's the scope and the boundaries of this particular assignment? So recognizing that delegation is really focused on results rather than methods goes a long way and helps provide clear upfront mutual understanding and commitment without dictating how the work gets done. So some of these things could be negotiated as you uh, as you discuss them, if there is some latitude in how that gets done. So not everything has to be defined, but that's up to you as a supervisor to determine what are the non-negotiables, what really does need to be, um, what boundaries really do need to be there. And if those boundaries don't need to be there, then don't set them. The third one is resources. What are the human, financial, technical, and other resources that have to be available? Will you need to introduce the delegate to certain individuals? Will you need to negotiate with other supervisors to get access to other colleagues or other resources or even budgets? Those kinds of things might need to be maintained by the supervisor to chase after and negotiate those aspects, or are those things that the employee or the delegate can do themselves? Accountability. What are the monitoring, reporting, and evaluation um, requirements of the assignment? And then finally, what are the consequences? And these are impacts and rewards. Obviously, you wouldn't want to say, well, the consequences if you screw up are these. We really, when we bring a delegated assignment forward, we also want to look, what are the intrinsic rewards by being involved in this delegated assignment? And to flesh some of those things out. So it's more than just a litany of tasks, but it's the opportunity for growth, knowledge development, and skill development are actually brought out of the assignment itself. Let's now look at the elements in the agreement, and I have uh, another what we call acronym for you here, ideals, and that's not really important to remember, but it does trace the cycle through. And that first part of the cycle is to introduce, as we said. If you can answer those 5 questions from before, then you're well on your way to being able to introduce um, a likely successful delegated assignment. And then to be able to demonstrate, to share examples of previous work, of maybe the data that was collected up to that point, and to be able to explain the objectives. And then to ensure, and this is where the support comes in, and also to secure a commitment from the delegate. And then to allocate, to grant authority to provide access to information, to provide access to the people and the resources that they need to be successful, and then to let go, to be able to allow the delegate to achieve and accomplish and achieve the objectives. And then, of course, to set up support and monitoring as it goes along, and also evaluating the success of the project at the end. So, effective delegation is perhaps the best indicator of effective management, simply because it's just so basic to both personal and organizational growth. It benefits the supervisors, as we talked about before, it benefits the employees, and it benefits the organization as a whole. And I hope this has been useful to you, and I'd like to, if you'd like to explore further, maybe do some self-assessments. I have a little treat for you here. These are 3 links that are delegation assessments, various assessments, to kind of see where you're at and maybe what your tendencies are as a delegate. And then you can see, hey, here are some tendencies I have, and I need to watch out for those. Or here are some things that I'm really good at. I want to exploit those and capitalize on those to make sure I have successful delegated agreements. All right, we've got a hand raised. John, uh, go ahead. Uh, maybe not. That's what I have for you today. I, I also
Joel,
want to. Oh, go
can you
ahead.
hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Sorry, those 3 links don't look like I can click on them.
Right. When we send this out, it'll be like a PDF. I will change those around for you and give you the actual links. I have to kind of tinker with this so that it's more usable for you. And if by chance something goes haywire and you want those and the links don't come through or something, just email me and I'll get those out to folks. and but hopefully I'll be able to tinker with that and give you at least the URL so that you can get to those links at a later time.
Usually when we send out the recording, the PowerPoint comes with it, so you'll be able to access it that way.
Yes, and I think what John is saying is that I've just have these as hot links, but you can't see the URL that's behind them, and I will provide that before we send out the slides. Just before we close here, I want to mention that we will not be doing an off-the-shelf in July, but we will return in August, and so be looking for the announcement on August's off-the-shelf offering. And thank you all for being with us today. Again, I'll stay here for any questions that folks may have, and be looking for the email to come out from Shane. Probably later today, right, Shane?
Yeah, it'll be today or tomorrow. One thing I'm going to mention is if you guys want credit, we're going to send that out in that email, how you can receive credit, but that will take about 2 or 3 weeks for the credit to roll through.